the last bit of Chapter 5 and on to Chapter 6. The power of narrative. There is also growing evidence that recovery from complex PTSD is reflected in the narrative a person tells about her life. The degree of recovery matches the degree to which a survivor's story is complete, coherent, and emotionally congruent, and told from a self-sympathetic perspective. In my experience, deep-level recovery is often reflected in a narrative that highlights the role of emotional neglect in describing what one has suffered and what one continues to deal with. My client Matt peeled a large layer of his onion of denial and minimization 2 days before Mother's Day. He came into his session in a terrible flashback. Life sucks, and I suck even more. I couldn't even do something as simple as pick out a Mother's Day card. Fortunately, Matt had achieved a great deal of deminimization since the previous Mother's Day, when he thought his mother was a good mother because she had never hit him. Now, however, he was heavily triggered by spending an hour in a card shop unable to find a card that he could send to his mother. As we explore this further, we discover that the sentiments written in every card made him feel like he would be betraying his inner child if he sent it. I tell you, Pete, not one of those cards describes something that I could be grateful for. I don't have one memory of anything nice she ever said or did for me. Before long, he was deep into grieving about how little mothering he had received from his mother. He cried and angered about the scornful look and the sarcastic tone of voice that so characterized his interactions with her. Why did I have to get such a bad deal from the mothering deck? Towards the end of the session, as often happens with healthy grieving, he felt his flashback resolve and was restored to feeling like he was once again on his own side. The relief of being out of the flashback also allowed his healthy sense of humor to return. He started riffing, "I'm going to start a greeting card business for people like me. I'm going to make a line of cards for people with dysfunctional mothers. How about this? Thanks, Mom, for never knowing what grade I was in." Or, "Thanks, Mom, for all the memories of you walking away whenever I was hurting." Or, "Thanks, Mom, for teaching me how to only notice what was wrong with me." Or, "Thanks, Mom, for teaching me how to frown at myself in self-disgust." Understanding how profoundly derelict your parents were in their duty to nurture and protect you is a master key to your recovery. You will benefit greatly from seeing emotional flashbacks as direct messages from your child self about how much your parents rejected you. When denial is significantly deconstructed, you will typically feel genuine compassion for the child that you were. This self-compassion assuages emotional neglect by providing you with the missed childhood experience of receiving empathy and painful emotional states, instead of contempt or abandonment. This then helps you to reverse the childhood survivor habit of automatic self-abandonment. In turn, this can further motivate you to identify and address the many ways you were abused and or neglected. Chapter 8 of my book, The Tao of Fully Feeling, provides detailed guidelines for assessing and remediating your abuse-neglect picture. Finally, it is an empowering accomplishment to really get the profound significance of childhood emotional neglect. It is often flashback resolving to realize in the moment that a flashback into bewilderment and hopelessness is an emotional reliving of your childhood trauma. Like nothing else, this can generate a self-protective impulse towards your child self and your present time self, kick-starting the process of resolving any given flashback. Chapter 6. What is my trauma type? This chapter describes the trauma typology for recognizing and recovering from the different types of CPTSD. We human beings respond with some vulnerability to childhood trauma. This model elaborates 4 basic survival strategies and defensive styles that develop out of our instincts: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. Variances in your childhood abuse-neglect pattern, birth order, and genetic results in your gravitating towards a specific 4F survival strategy. You do this as a child to prevent, escape, or ameliorate further traumatization. Fight types develop a narcissistic-like defense. Flight types develop an obsessive-compulsive-like defense. Freeze types develop a dissociative-like defense. Fawn types develop a codependent-like defense. Healthy employment of the 4Fs. People who experience good enough parenting in childhood arrive in adulthood with a healthy and flexible response repertoire to danger. In the face of real danger, they have appropriate access to all of their 4F choices. Easy access to the fight response ensures good boundaries, healthy assertiveness, and aggressive self-protectiveness if necessary. Untraumatized people also easily and appropriately access their flight instinct and disengage and retreat when confrontation would exacerbate their danger. Untraumatized people also freeze appropriately and give up and quit struggling when further activity or resistance is futile or counterproductive. Additionally, the freeze response is sometimes our first response to danger, as when we become still, quiet, and camouflaged to buy time, to assess the danger and decide whether fight, flight, continued freeze, or fawn is our best option. And finally, untraumatized people also fawn in a non-groveling manner and are able to listen, help, and compromise as readily as they assert and express themselves and their needs, rights, and points of view. A deeper elaboration of the origins of these 4 defenses is found below and in the next chapter. Those who are repetitively traumatized in childhood often learn to survive by overusing one of the 2 of the 4F responses. Fixation in any one 4F response not only limits our ability to access all others, but also severely impairs our ability to relax into an undefended state. Additionally, it strands us in a narrow, impoverished experience of life. Over time, a habitual 4F defense also serves to distract us from the nagging voice of the critic and the painful feelings that underlie it. Preoccupation with the 4F behaviors dull our awareness of our unresolved past trauma and the pain of our current alienation. This chart compares the harmful behaviors of each defensive structure. Real or imagined danger typically triggers us into these roles and behaviors when we are in emotional flashback. CPTSD is an attachment disorder. Excessive reliance on a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response is the traumatized child's unconscious attempt to cope with the constant danger. It is also a strategy to strengthen the illusion that our parents really care about us. In adult life, all 4F types are commonly ambivalent about real intimacy. This is because closeness often triggers us into painful emotional flashbacks. It reminds us of how we had to survive without comforting connection in childhood. Our 4F defenses therefore offer protection against further reabandonment by precluding the type of vulnerable relating that leads to deeper bonding. A survivor also avoids vulnerable relating because his past makes him believe that he will be attacked or abandoned as he was in childhood. This is why showing vulnerability often triggers painful emotional flashbacks. Many fight types avoid real intimacy by alienating others with their angry and controlling demands of unconditional love. This unrealistic demand to have their unmet childhood needs met destroys the possibility of intimacy. Moreover, some fight types delude themselves into believing that they are perfect. They see the other as the one who needs to be perfected. This defense belief then entitles them to totally blame their partners for relationship problems. Many flight types stay perpetually busy and industrious to avoid being triggered by deeper relating. Others also work obsessively to perfect themselves, hoping to someday become worthy enough of love. Such flight types have great difficulty showing anything but their perfect persona. Many freeze types hide away in their rooms and reveries, fully convinced that the world of relating holds nothing for them. Freeze types who have not been totally turned off relationships by horrible childhood neglect or abuse gravitate to online relationships. Online relating can be pursued safely at home with as little contact as desired. Many fawn types avoid emotional investment and potential disappointment by barely showing themselves. They hide behind their helpful persona and over-listen, over-elicit, and overdo for the other. By over-focusing on their partners, they then do not have to risk real self-exposure and the possibility of deeper level rejection. This chart compares and contrasts the differences between the four types. Now let us examine each of the four F defenses more closely with a view toward decreasing our over-reliance on them. The fight type and the narcissistic defense. Fight types are unconsciously driven by the belief that power and control can create safety, assuage abandonment, and secure love. Children who are spoiled and given insufficient limits, a uniquely painful type of abandonment, can become fight types. Children who are allowed to imitate the bullying of a narcissistic parent may also develop a habitual fight response. Numerous fight types start out as older siblings who overpower their younger siblings, just as their parents overpowered them. Fight types learn to respond to their feelings of abandonment with anger. Many use contempt, a poisonous blend of narcissistic rage and disgust, to intimidate and shame others into mirroring them. Narcissists treat others as if they are extensions of themselves. The entitled fight type commonly uses others as an audience for his incessant monologuing. He may treat a captured freeze or fawn type as a slave in a dominant-submission relationship. The price of admission to a relationship with an extreme narcissist is self-annihilation. One of my clients quipped, "Narcissists don't have relationships, they take prisoners." The charming bully. Especially devolved fight types can become sociopathic. Sociopathy can range along a continuum that stretches from corrupt politician to vicious criminal. A particularly nasty sociopath, who I call the charming bully, probably falls somewhere around the middle of this continuum. The charming bully behaves in a friendly manner some of the time. He can even occasionally listen and be helpful in small amounts, but he still uses his contempt to overpower and control others. This type typically relies on scapegoats for the dumping of his vitriol. These unfortunate scapegoats are typically weaker than him. They may be members of a disenfranchised group, the ethnic employees, the gays, women, his problem child or wife, etc. He generally spares his favorite from his behavior, unless they get out of line. If the charming bully is charismatic enough, those close to him will often fail to register the unconscionable meaning of his scapegoating. The bully's favorite often slip into denial, relieved that they are not the target. Especially charismatic bullies may even be admired and seen as great. Being the scapegoated child or spouse of such a bully is especially problematic because it is so difficult to get anyone to validate that you were or are being abused by them. I remember how perplexed I used to be at photos of Hitler ostensibly acting kindly to his children, and I think as I write this of how many billionaires are venerated and how most of them stand up very poorly to closer scrutiny. So many billionaires use sociopathic tactics to accrue their fortunes. Examples of this are hostile takeovers, exploitive labor policies, health-destroying work conditions, devastating environmental practices, and various other forms of cheating, lying, and backstabbing. Their great icon, Henry Ford, would regularly place new young workers at the front of his innovative assembly lines. The tired, used-up workers further down the line who could not then keep up were unceremoniously ushered out the back door. Labor unions eventually curtailed that practice in this country, but many jobs have since been exported to unregulated third world countries where workers labor in the same atrocious soul and body destroying conditions. And then on a much less grand level, I remember a best friend I had in my 20s. I thought he was a great guy for almost 2 years until one day, shopping in the supermarket with him, I witnessed his demeaning lambasting of an innocent checker just out of sheer spite. Other types of narcissists. Rageaholic narcissists are often infamous for using other people as dumping grounds for their anger. They are addicted to the emotional releasing of cathartic in this way. The relief often does not last long before they are looking for another fix of venting their spleen. This type of narcissism is pure bullying. The bullying alone can cause PTSD. If it goes on long enough, as it does with bullying parents in a dysfunctional family, it can cause CPTSD. If this rings a bell with you, please check out www.nobullying.com. Nobully.com. Furthermore, and closer to a key theme of this book, I report the evidence of more than a few clients who were horribly abused by their pillar of the community narcissistic parents. Among them is my suave, silent type father, who regularly raged at and backhanded me and my sisters. He was much admired in our neighborhood. A final example of narcissism is the charming narcissist who is not necessarily a bully. I call this type of the narcissist in codependent clothing. My friend's father is this type of charming narcissist. When you meet him, he lures you in with his questions and elicitations that make you feel like he is interested in you. But within a few minutes, once you have taken the bait, he suddenly shifts into monologuing like a filibuster. This particular type often masters the run-on sentence, and there is nary a pause to interject or even offer an excuse for escaping. You have become a captive audience, and your release will not be procured easily. Recovering from a polarized fight response. I agree with the widely held notion that extreme narcissists and sociopaths are untreatable. Typically, they are convinced that they themselves are perfect and that everyone else is the problem. Fight types who are not true narcissists, however, benefit from understanding the costly price they pay for controlling others with intimidation, criticism, and sarcasm. Some who I work with eventually say how their aggressive behavior scared away their potential intimates. One survivor also realized that although her partner stayed, he was so afraid and resentful of her demandingness and irritability that he could not manifest the warmth of real liking that she so desperately desired. I have also helped a number of fight types understand the downward spiral of power and alienation that comes from being over-controlling. It looks like this. Excessive use of power triggers a fearful emotional withdrawal in the other, which makes the fight type feel even more abandoned. In turn, he becomes more outraged and contemptuous, which then further distances his intimate. This once again increases the fight type rage and disgust, which then creates increasing distance and the withholding of warmth and infinitum. Fight types benefit from learning to redirect their rage towards the awful childhood circumstances that cause them to adapt such an intimacy-destroying defense. Can help them to deconstruct their habits of instantly morphing abandonment feelings into rage and disgust. As the recovering fight type becomes more conscious of his abandonment feelings, he can learn to release his fear and shame with tears. I have helped several fight types by guiding them to cry to release their hurt, rather than always polarizing to anger it out. When we are hurt, part of us is sad and part of us is mad, and no amount of angering can ever metabolize our sadness. Fight types need to see how their condescending moral high ground position alienates others and perpetuates their present time abandonment. They must renounce the illusion of their own perfection and the habit of projecting perfectionistic inner critic processes onto others. This is the work of shrinking the outer critic, as will be seen in Chapter 10. Fight types also benefit from learning to take self-initiated timeouts whenever they notice that they are triggered and feeling overcritical. Timeouts can be used to redirect the lion's share of their hurt feelings into grieving and working through their original abandonment, rather than displacing it destructively onto current intimates. Furthermore, like all 4F fixations, fight types need to become more flexible and adaptable in using the other 4F responses. If you are a recovering fight type, it will especially benefit you to learn the empathy response of the fawn position. Begin by trying to imagine how it feels to be the person you are interacting with. Do it as much as you can. Moreover, you can expand on this by developing mindfulness about the needs, rights, and feelings of those with whom you would like to have real intimacy. In early recovery, you can fake it until you make it. For without practicing consideration for the other, and without reciprocity and dialogicality, as opposed to monologuing, the intimacy you crave will elude you. The fight type and the obsessive-compulsive defense. The flight type and the obsessive-compulsive defense. Extreme flight types are like machines with the switch stuck in the on position. They are obsessively and compulsively driven by the unconscious belief that perfection will make them safe and lovable. They rush to achieve. They rush as much in thought, obsession, as they do in action, compulsion. As children, flight types variably respond to their family trauma on a hyperactive continuum. The flight defense continuum stretches between the extreme of the driven A student and the ADHD dropout running amok. Flight types relentlessly flee the inner pain of their abandonment with the symbolic flight of constant busyness. Left brain disassociation. When the obsessive-compulsive flight type is not doing, she is worrying and planning about doing. She becomes what John Bradshaw calls the human doing, as opposed to the human being. Obsessiveness in the left brain disassociation, as opposed to the classic right brain disassociation of the freeze type described below. Left brain disassociation is using constant thinking to distract yourself from underlying abandonment pain. When thinking is worrying, it is as if underlying fear wafts up and taints the thinking process. Moreover, if compulsivity is hurrying to stay one step ahead of your repressed pain, obsessing is worrying to stay one level above underlying pain. As a flight type, myself, I sometimes find myself obsessively worrying through my outline just before a lecture. I do it in part to stay buoyant above my performance anxiety, a subset of my abandonment fear. In my early days of teaching, I would also employ a compulsive defense and pace as I anxiously searched my brain for a missing word. Sometimes I would even scramble frantically through the dictionary or thesaurus to find it. Unconsciously, it was like I was searching for a safe place beyond the gravity of my anxiety. Flight types are also prone to becoming addicted to their own adrenaline. Some recklessly and regularly pursue risky and dangerous activities to jumpstart an adrenaline high. Flight types are also susceptible to the process of addictions of workaholism and busyholism. To keep these processes humming, they can deteriorate into stimulating substance addictions. Severely traumatized flight types may dissolve into an obsessive-compulsive disorder. Recovering from a polarized flight response. The flight types that I have worked with are so busy trying to stay one step ahead of their pain that introspecting out loud in the therapy hour is the only time they find for self-examination. Learning about the 4F model often helps them to renounce the perfectionistic demands of the inner critic. I gently and repetitively focus on confronting their denial and minimization about the cost of perfectionism. This is especially important with workaholics who often admit their addiction but secretly hold onto it as a badge of pride and superiority. Flight types can get stuck in their head by being over-analytical. Once a critical mass of understanding CPTSD is achieved, it is crucial for them to start moving into their feelings. Sooner or later, they must deepen their work by grieving about their childhood losses. Self-compassionate crying is an unparalleled tool for shrinking the obsessive perseveration of the critic and for ameliorating the habit of compulsive rushing. As her recovery progresses, the flight type can acquire a gearbox that allows her to engage life at a variety of speeds, including neutral. Neutral is especially important for flight types to cultivate. If you are a flight type, there are a plethora of self-help books, CDs, and classes that can help you learn to relax and decrease the habit of habitually doing. This is so essential because you can get so lost in busyness that you have difficulty seeing the forest from the trees. This makes you prone to prioritizing the wrong tasks and getting lost in inessential activities. When I am triggered, I often feel pulled to busy myself with the simplest and easiest tasks, sometimes losing sight of my key responsibilities. And flashback flight types can deteriorate into chicken with its head cut off mode, as fear and anxiety propel them into scattered activity. Spinning their wheels, they can rush about aimlessly, as if motion itself is the only thing important. At such times, the flight type can rescue himself from panicky flight by inverting an old cliche into "don't just do something, stand there." And by stand there, I mean stop and take some time to become centered and to reprioritize. To accomplish this, I recommend 3-minute mini chair meditations. If you are a flight type, you can enhance your recovery greatly by giving yourself a few of these each day. You can start a chair meditation by closing your eyes. Gently ask your body to relax. Feel each of your major muscle groups and softly encourage them to relax. Breathe deeply and slowly. When you have relaxed your muscles and deepened and slowed your breath, ask yourself, what is my most important priority right now? What is the most beneficial thing I can do next? As you get more proficient at this and can manage sitting for a longer time, try the question, what hurt am I running from right now? Can I open my heart to the idea and an image of soothing myself in my pain? Finally, there are numerous flight types who exhibit symptoms that may be misdiagnosed as cyclothymia, a minor bipolar disorder. This issue is addressed at length in Chapter 12. The freeze type and the dissociative defense. The freeze response, also known as the camouflage response, often triggers a survivor into hiding, isolating, and avoiding human contact. The freeze type can be so frozen in the retreat mode that it seems as if their starter button is stuck in the off position. Of all the four Fs, freeze types seem to have the deepest unconscious belief that people in danger are synonymous. While all four F types commonly suffer from social anxiety as well, freeze types typically take a great deal more refuge in solitude. Some freeze types completely give up on relating to others and become extremely isolated. Outside of fantasy, many also give up entirely on the possibility of love. I might be there. Right brain disassociation. It is often the scapegoat or the most profoundly abandoned child, the lost child, who is forced to habituate to the freeze response. Not allowed to successfully employ fight, flight, or fawn responses, the freeze type's defense develops around classical or right brain disassociation. Disassociation allows the freeze type to disconnect from experiencing his abandonment pain and protects him from risky social interactions, any of which might trigger feelings of being re-traumatized. If you are a freeze type, you may seek refuge and comfort by disassociating in prolonged bouts of sleep, daydreaming, and wishing, and right brain dominant activities like TV, online browsing, and video games. Freeze types sometimes have or appear to have attention deficit disorder. They often master the art of changing the internal channel whenever an inner experience becomes uncomfortable. When they are especially traumatized or triggered, they may exhibit a schizoid-like detachment from ordinary reality. In worst-case scenarios, they can decompensate into a schizophrenic experience, like the main character in the book, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. Recovery from polarized freeze response. Recovery for freeze types involve three key challenges. First, their positive relational experiences are few, if any. They are therefore extremely reluctant to enter into the type of intimate relationship that can be transformative. They are even less likely to seek the aid of therapy. Moreover, those who manage to overcome this reluctance often spook easily and quickly terminate. Second, freeze types have two commonalities with fight types. They are less motivated to try to understand the effects of their childhood traumatization. Many are unaware that they have a troublesome inner critic or that they are in emotional pain. Furthermore, they tend to project the perfectionistic demands of the critic onto others rather than onto themselves. This survival mechanism helped them as a child to use the imperfections of others as a justification for isolation. In the past, isolation was smart, safety-seeking behavior. Third, even more than workaholic flight types, freeze types are in denial about the life-narrowing consequences of their singular adoption. Some freeze types that I have worked with seem to have significant periods of contentment in their isolation. I think they may be able to self-medicate by releasing the internal opiates that the animal brain is programmed to release when in danger is so great that death seems imminent. Internal opiate release is more accessible to freeze types because the freeze response has its own continuum that culminates with the collapse response. The collapse response is an extreme abandonment of consciousness. It appears to be an out-of-body experience that is the ultimate disassociation. It can sometimes be seen in prey animals that are about to be killed. I have seen nature films of small animals in the jaws of predators that show it letting go so thoroughly that its death appears to be painless. However, the opiate production that some freeze types have access to only takes the survivor so far before its analgesic properties no longer function. Numbed out contentment then morphs into serious depression. This in turn can lead to addictive self-medicating with substances like alcohol, marijuana, and narcotics. Alternatively, the freeze type can gravitate towards ever-escalating regimens of antidepressants and anxiolytics. I also suspect that some schizophrenics are extremely traumatized freeze types who disassociate so thoroughly that they cannot find their way back to reality. Several of my freeze type respondents highly recommend a self-help book by Suzette Boone entitled Coping with Trauma-Related Disassociation. This book is filled with very helpful worksheets that are powerful tools for recovering. More than any type, the freeze type usually requires a therapeutic relationship, because their isolation prevents them from discovering relational healing through a friendship. That said, I know of some instances where good enough relational healing has come through pets and safer, distant type of human healing that can be found in books and online internet groups. Thanks for listening.